there is causing amongst the Lebanese. But when it comes to Iran, the clock is going to be determined by the amount of ammunition that the Americans have, because we heard in the week before this began that there were concerns in the Pentagon. You know, it's very unusual for Pentagon commanders to leak concerns they have, but they were leaking their concerns that ahead of this campaign that there were not enough munitions to last more than, at the most, 2 weeks. And the big concern is the interceptors. These are very expensive weapons that can bring down drones or rockets or missiles. And the concern is that not just that weren't enough of those, and we also heard from the Institute of International Strategic Studies, which produces every year its military balance. And at the announcement of that this year, they said there is a lot of concern that America doesn't have enough, particularly interceptors, but also munitions, to engage in this war if it wants to prepare for the chances, the possibility of confrontation with a peer-level adversary. Now, that would be China, if China chose to invade Taiwan, for instance. So, you know, the Americans have a limit in what they can use in the Middle East because they have to always be ready for the possibility of something else happening that's unexpected elsewhere in the world. So Donald Trump would have been told that he has 2 weeks' worth of munitions at the very most. He's talking about 4 weeks. He's talking about boots on the ground. But I think we can assume that at the moment is bluster. And the question for the Iranians is, can they last for that long? And what we're seeing from them is a clever strategy of trying to draw out those interceptors, try to degrade America's munition stockpile by attacking pretty much everything they can and using that to sort of level the playing field. I think the other problem for the Americans here, Yalda, is that for the Americans and the Israelis to declare success, they've got to bring down the regime. They've said that is their declared objective. The Iranians, therefore, have just got to survive. They've got to keep their regime intact. It's very resilient. It has been preparing for this kind of regime-changing war for decades, and it may well last 2 weeks. And then what happens next? And that's, you know, that's the problem. And the impression I think allies are, well, at least wondering about is, do the Americans have a strategy for that? And do they have a strategy for the day after? So very uncertain times, I think. And I think the concern for Britain, therefore, having kind of hitched its wagon to this campaign, at least allowing the Americans to use British bases and now using British military assets as part of this offensive, if only in a defensive way, is if it is going in an uncertain direction, what does that mean for Britain as well?
Indeed. Dom, thanks so much. Well, Qatar has confirmed it shot down 2 Russian-made Iranian warplanes. It comes after 3 American fighter jets were shot down accidentally by Kuwait. Earlier, I spoke to our military analyst, Sean Bell, who said the patchwork of airspace in the region and lack of joint training meant it was possible more aircraft would be shot down, including in friendly fire incidents. Have a listen.
The 2 Iranian Su-24s, they're Fencer aircraft. They're of the 1960s vintage, so my sort of age, not yours. So they've been around a long time. They're not incredibly capable. But the Iranian Air Force does have quite a lot of fighter jets, but again, they're nearly all of this elderly vintage. I've been wondering why the Iranian Air Force has not been more involved. It does appear that they've taken a go, and very successfully. Qatar, as a lot of the Middle East countries, are blistering with modern technology. We don't know the details of how they were taken down, but the air defense systems have certainly kicked in, and the Qataris have also claimed to have shot down 7 ballistic missiles and about 50 drones as well. So there is clearly a lot of activity going on, and I don't think we've heard the last of it yet.
Yeah, and, you know, as you say, are we likely to see more of these Gulf states now taking action, stepping up and confronting Iranian fighter jets and missiles themselves rather than waiting for the United States to assist them?
Yeah, I mean, you also reported on the fact that Kuwait accidentally shot down 3 F-15 Strike Eagles in the early hours of the morning. I mean, as a former fighter pilot, I mean, there'll be several of you, and then you see the pilots ejecting out of those aircraft landing safely. As somebody who's ejected out of a military aeroplane, I can tell you it's all very dynamic, but of course, they'll be very glad to be alive, and at least they had an exit. But it is worth remembering, each of these Gulf states has their own airspace. Most of it, apart from Saudi, is relatively small. Therefore, it's quite difficult to deconflict who shoots down what. And particularly with Iran firing cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, you can imagine most of these Gulf states have got their finger on the trigger to try and shoot stuff down. And if it's not been well coordinated, as it appears as happens here, then they shoot first and ask questions later. I have to say that it's not just the Middle East do this. When the Gulf War, when we were going backwards and forwards, we were more worried about heading towards American defense systems in Kuwait than we were about Iraqi systems. Unless you train together and deconflict airspace, you're traveling around in a military jet well over Mach 1, and therefore it's really critical that these things, sort of eventualities, are practiced. And unfortunately, as we're seeing, this last-minute operation has unintended consequences. Fortunately, it's only military hardware that was damaged, not pilots. Otherwise, that would have been another tragic loss of American aircrew.
Sean Bell speaking to me there a little earlier. In the last few minutes, Caroline Levitt, who is the White House spokesperson, has put out a tweet, quite a lengthy statement. I'm going to get that up on our screen in a moment. She says, on Saturday, President Trump released a statement laying out clear objectives to the American people for Operation Epic Fury. Let me reiterate them. She goes on, destroy the Iranian regime's missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground, annihilate the Iranian regime's navy, ensure the regime's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world and attack our forces, stop them from making and using IEDs or roadside bombs, which have gravely wounded and killed thousands of Americans, of people rather, including Americans, guarantee that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon, preventing this radical regime and its terrorist leaders from threatening America and our core national security interests is a clear-eyed and necessary objective. So that's a tweet that Caroline Levitt, the White House spokesperson, has put out, a very lengthy statement there. A lot of questions being asked, especially at that press conference with Pete Hegseth, the war secretary, as well as to Donald Trump, about the objectives of this war and whether they're clear enough and how long this war is likely to go on. So Caroline Levitt putting out that statement. Well, this latest flare-up of fighting across the region has had an impact on the global markets and the price of energy. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, can tell us more.
There are potentially big economic consequences to what's happening in Iran. I want to start, first of all, with the kind of oil prices. So, look, this is the oil price, up by 9%. So, you know, a big rise, but not perhaps as big as some people had expected. But if that is closed, so that Strait of Hormuz is closed, you know, to 50% of traffic, that pushes the oil price potentially even higher. This is a projection. If it's closed completely, then you see that line going even higher. So there's that traffic issue, and it's not just oil, it's things like fertilizers as well. But there's also something else, because at the heart of this area here is something that's known as the North Field. That is the single biggest gas field, so natural gas, anywhere in the world. And although this is thousands of miles away from the UK, we're likely to become quite dependent on it. At least those are the current plans. This is showing you UK gas consumption 2024, this year that we're kind of due to be in at the moment, and then out into the future. And if you break down where that gas is supposed to be coming from, well, some of it comes from the North Sea, but you can see the dark blue bits, they get smaller and smaller because we've got less gas coming out of the North Sea. But look at the red. That's Qatari gas. And right now, so in 2024, it was only 2% of our supply came from Qatar. But just this year, it's expected to provide 10 billion cubic metres. And by 2035, you're talking about 20% of UK gas coming from Qatar, from that North Field, even more than comes from the North Sea itself. And that is why, when you look at UK gas prices, look at this. Just today, up by 50%, because people are looking at that and getting quite concerned. And this is only the highest since February 2025, and it's nowhere near as high as it got around the time of the Ukraine invasion. But just that increase alone, in percentage terms, it's the single biggest one-day increase that we've seen in UK gas prices going all the way back to 2022. In other words, when you look at what's happening in Iran, this could have serious consequences for the UK economy.
Ed Conway with that report. Now, despite the UK allowing American forces to use its bases for defensive operations, President Trump has said he is disappointed in the Prime Minister for not going a step further. Sir Keir Starmer said when it came to involvement, he would always stick by international law.
But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done, and I stand by it. But, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that Iran's outrageous response has become a threat to our people, our interests and our allies, and it cannot be ignored. Iran has lashed out across the region. They've launched hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones at countries which did not attack them, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, Bahrain and Oman. And overnight, Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, launched attacks on Israel, seeking to escalate the war. Mr. Speaker, there are an estimated 300,000 British citizens in the regions, residents, families on holiday, and those in transit. Iran has hit airports and hotels where British citizens are staying. It is deeply concerning for the whole House and the whole country. And, Mr. Speaker, our armed forces are also being put at risk by Iran's action.
Prime Minister there. Well, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who joins me live now. And John, we heard the Prime Minister make that marathon statement and taking on questions after that U-turn, coming under quite a bit of flack for the U-turn. A lot of people invoking the war in Iraq.
Yes, the war in Iraq was mentioned several times by MPs on both sides of the House. It wasn't so much the statement that was a marathon, it was the questions afterwards. He started just after 3:30 and it went on until it got around about 5:30. Now, the Prime Minister is due to be speaking to his backbenchers in what? 10 minutes or so. That was supposed to start at 6 o'clock. That's been postponed by half an hour. But in the Commons chamber, faced with criticism from Kemi Badenoch, Sir Ed Davey, Richard Tice of Reform UK and countless Labour backbenchers, the Prime Minister, I wouldn't say he struggled to defend his position, but he battled bravely to defend his position, his argument being that what he's agreed to is defensive action, not offensive action. Now, several MPs raised the question of a Commons vote on this military involvement, and his answer didn't really please them, and that's something I reckon will come up at the PLP meeting in the next 10 minutes or so, the question of MPs being given a vote on this. Now, his answer was, if we were going into war, offensive action, yes, there'd be a vote, but not for something that's purely defending the interests of British citizens in places like Dubai and so on, when it's purely defensive action. Now, the President and the Vice President have criticised the Prime Minister's action today. He was accused by MPs in the chamber on the opposition side of being indecisive by switching his position from last week to last night when he made a TV broadcast. Labour backbenchers, of course, some of them, you might say the usual suspects, talked about an illegal war. And when Iraq was raised, of course, the Prime Minister said we've learned the lessons of Iraq. Well, that would be disputed by many MPs. Amongst the Labour rebels who spoke this afternoon were the three Labour left-wingers who are still in the House who voted against the Iraq war in 2003. Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, first two no longer Labour MPs, of course. And there are plenty who say who said to the Prime Minister, "You're making the same mistake as we did over Iraq, Syria, and Libya those years ago." There was also a call from Sir Jeremy Hunt for more defence spending, and he's got a fairly sympathetic answer from the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister has battled to defend his position in the face of a lot of criticism from MPs, including many on his own side. In the next few minutes, he's going to be speaking to Labour MPs and peers about, no doubt, the very same thing. Also, an inquest, no doubt, into that humiliating by-election defeat last Thursday in Gorton and Denton. But he kept stressing in the chamber about the international law and doing the right thing under the law. And up in the gallery, we're looking down on him, was the dapper figure, I think we can call him, of Lord Hermer, the controversial Attorney General, who many MPs blame for some of the Prime Minister's indecision and some of his policies being far too legalistic and lacking what they would see as sound common sense. So, typical lawyerly performance from the Prime Minister. Didn't get a great reception, it has to be said, from many critics in the chamber. Although, to be fair, the chamber was packed and there were plenty of loyal backbenchers as well. Let's see what the next hour brings as he faces the Parliamentary Labour Party peers and his own MPs.
Indeed, John, thank you so much. So what's been the reaction here in Israel? Earlier I spoke to former Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who told me what Israel and the US are looking to achieve. Have a listen.
It's very important that I think the overall strategic goal of creating the condition for regime change in Iran, which will eventually make our life much more easier in the entire area, is very important. And it may take some time, but I think we should be aware that we are not talking about, the next quarter oil price or the next elections. We need to look at the next generations to come and how this area will evolve. And Iran, it showed itself as a global challenge. It's operated in Ukraine with its UAV. It hit Cyprus. It hit other places. Obviously, it's regional challenge, and it's also a threat for the state of Israel. So I really appreciate the leadership of both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu for deciding to move forward with this offensive. And I hope it won't be long, but it might take some time.
Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear that he wants to see regime change. Donald Trump hinted at that, but Pete Hegseth today said we didn't go in this for regime change. Do you think launching an aerial campaign alone can bring about regime change in a place that has built its entire infrastructure on multiple layers?
Yes, definitely. I think the regime change in Iran will happen from the Iranian society who seek normal life, and it's a great culture that deserves to have better life than it had prior to this fundamentalistic regime that actually acted in different places around the world, but also very much brutally against its own people, 30 or 40,000 people just a month ago. So it's for them to decide, but we need to create the condition for them to operate, and I think that by attacking Iran, attacking its government, attacking its military site, attacking the nuclear aspects, the missiles, of course, we are setting the base for them to decide what they want to do with themselves, and we'll see where it goes.
We have 180,000 Revolutionary Guard, almost 1 million Basij, 2 million reservists who are Basij. They are the ones with the guns. Even if this campaign goes on for 4 to 5 weeks, is it fair to expect unarmed civilians to come out and take over their government?
Well, it's a very complicated situation over there, but I suggest we'll take it one step at a time. Currently, we are neutralizing Iran's command and control system and Iran's capacity to influence the region, and we'll see what comes next. I think we have to be very decisive on this. We must maintain operational offensive continuity to assess where are we all the time and then to take the decisions.
Do you think eventually there will be a need for boots on the ground?
I would not exclude it for those reasons or other, but we'll have to see how it goes forward.
And will that include Israeli boots on the ground, do you think?
I exclude nothing. We've been waiting for 47 years And we came to a point where every necessary means should be taken in order to achieve our goals.
What we're seeing from the Iranian regime is energy infrastructure being hit, civilian targets across the Gulf, missiles over Israel, where 11 people have now died in total here in Israel. If this is going to be a campaign that lasts 4 to 5 weeks, has Israel factored in that civilian deaths will increase here?
Yes.
And that we will continue to see across the Gulf as well?
There are no free lunch, and there's no free lunch, and we need to understand, the more you want to achieve, the more you have to pay. We understand it, but once again, we are not looking for what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next quarter. We need to look at our next generation. What about my kids? What about my grandkids? Where are they going to grow up? What will be the conditions around us? I think that people in this region deserve not to live under this tyranny umbrella of Iran, the way they have used it, the way they've destabilized the entire region. And I think it's about time to take care of it. And I'm glad that we are doing it. I know it's not going to be easy. We may suffer some hits. We'll have ups and downs. That's the way it is. But I think we should do it.
Diplomats I'm speaking to in the region who have made contact with Iranian officials say they are being very calm and firm in this moment, especially because the IRGC has a plan after the killing of the supreme leader. They set out a plan, and we're seeing those plans unfold on their part as well. So do you think that ultimately, if regime change doesn't come, what is the plan B for Israel and the United States?
Well, definitely, we started pretty much with lots of achievement in our hands, because if you decapitalize the leadership, if you take care of the nuclear aspect, if you take care of the missiles that influence actually the entire area, that's a lot to achieve. Now, there is one threshold that went across. The United States, the State of Israel, and others decided to operate, not to talk, to do. And this is something very new for the Iranians themselves. And I think they will recalculate everything that they are doing. So I hope the regime won't be there to do those calculus. But if he gets to stay there this way or another by other leader or whatever it is, he needs to know that we can come again.
Israel has never hit the head of state of a foreign country. What changed now?
Well, I think that Khamenei was the one who was directing all those terror activities all around the globe, definitely the region, and I think he deserved what he got.
Does this mean other foreign leaders are fair game in the future for Israel?
I don't see other foreign leaders doing it.
But say if another leader in Iran emerged?
If somebody chooses to walk in this direction, he needs to know what will be the end of it.
And for the Israeli people, do you think that they will continue to tolerate going into bunkers every night for 3 to 4, 5 weeks?
Yalda, unfortunately, we are very experienced on those issues. And as far as Iran is, as far as security, there's no right or left, right or wrong. There is right or wrong, and I think we are right. And we are united in standing against this aggression. We know what he did for us with Hezbollah, what he did for us with Hamas, what he did for us with the Houthis, what he did to us directly. I think we understand we need to take care of ourselves.
And what do you say to those who say that Iran didn't start this war, that Israel and the United States struck Iran on Saturday, and therefore what they're doing is a retaliation?
No, I think we did it with a preliminary act, but we are following their aggression. The October 7, it's a war initiated by the Iranians. What we have seen from Lebanon, it was initiated by the Iranians. What the UAE suffered was initiated by the Iranians. What the Saudis in Aramco suffered was initiated by the Iranians. So the war started by the Iranians many, many years ago. And it's good that we are now coming back with offensive operation to try to change it.
Mr. Gantz, in 2003, the United States went to war to change the regime in Iraq. After they went to the Security Council, after they got congressional approval, with a coalition of about 49 countries. This time, it's the United States and Israel. Europeans are reluctant to get involved. The British Prime Minister has indicated that he's reluctant to get involved. Do you think this operation can be successful, given what we've seen in the past with Iraq, for example?
I hope that other countries will join us, because it's really, once again, people need to understand. Iran influences all over the world. I mean, look at the drug issues in Venezuela. It's from Iran. Look at the UAVs who are being exploded in Kiev. It's from Iran. Look what's happening. Let us not close our eyes. And I think it's not time for appeasement. It's time to be decisive, to work together, to change it, and then to enable the Iranian people, which come from a great culture, to revive their own country, and we can live together beside them. You know, my father-in-law did not participate in his own father's funeral many, many decades ago because he was with Iranian doing things together. So it's possible. It's just this regime between a bright future for the people of Iran and the reality. And I hope that it will go away and they can live their own life.
If the energy infrastructure continues to be hit and civilian targets across the Gulf, if the Gulf states come to Israel and the United States and pressures you to stop because of how they're being targeted, is that something that you think Israel will consider?
We considered always what's happening to our allies, what's happening to our friends, but they also understand the need to operate against the Iranians because they don't blink. They understand that it's about time to do something with it.
Former Defense Minister of Israel, Benny Gantz there. We've just got some breaking news that's just come into us from the Reuters news agency. They say Iran's Revolutionary Guard said a fuel tanker was burning in the Strait of Hormuz after being hit by 2 drones. They had told Iran's news agencies that had reported this today. The Strait is the world's most vital oil export route, connecting the biggest Gulf oil producers such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq and the United Arab Emirates. So that news just coming in that Iran's Revolutionary Guard say a fuel tanker was burning in the Strait of Hormuz after being hit by 2 drones. Now, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, has been speaking in the last few minutes. Let's just have a listen.
Their navy and crush the regime's proxy network. We are hitting decisively, surgically, without apology. As we dismantle the regime, the Iranian leadership is lashing out in desperation. Over the past few days, missiles have been fired at Israel, most of them, but also the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and even on European soil in Cyprus. This is not strategy. It is panic. It is desperate. While we strike military facilities and the machinery of terror with precision, the Iranian regime strikes civilians, families, airports, hotels, shopping centers, people's homes. In Beit Shemesh, a city near Jerusalem, 4 apartment buildings were destroyed. 9 innocent people were murdered, including these 3 young siblings, Sarah, Abigail, and Yaakov Bitton. Same family, together.
That's UN envoy Danny Danon. Well, let's bring in our General, Sir Nick Carter, former Chief of the Defence Staff. Thank you so much, Sir Nick, for joining us here on the programme. Do you believe that the objectives of the United States and Israel are clear?
I think we heard a speech from President Trump on Saturday when he spoke for about 8 minutes about what the attacks were designed to do. I think that's as clear as it probably got, and I don't think we've heard much more since on what those objectives are. It did seem to me in that speech that he talked obviously about getting after the nuclear programme again, despite its obliteration in June of last year. He talked about the ballistic missile programme. He talked about the proxies, and of course he talked about regime change, but I don't think we've got absolute clarity on what those objectives really mean. No, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I guess to quote General Petraeus, who often says, you know, tell me how this ends. They may say that this could go on for 4 to 5 weeks, but they don't really have a control of this spilling out the way it has across the region and frankly, intensifying within the region.
No, absolutely. And of course, the big problem they've got is that modern munitions are not made quickly, and the extent to which they've got the stockpiles to be able to prosecute this campaign at the rate of intensity that they have been doing it over the last 48 hours, I think remains to be seen. And of course, all of us will be nervous that this will denude their capability to be able to underwrite what's needed in other theatres of operations, not least Ukraine, for example. And of course, things like air defence interceptors, which are going to be absolutely vital if they can't write down the Iranian BMD programme quickly, are going to be very precious, I would have thought. So 4 to 5 weeks, that's going to be a lot of munitions, I would have thought.
Yes, and given, you know, we knew during the 12-day war that the stockpile, Israel's stockpile, for example, was low on interceptors, there's only so long this conflict can sustain before there needs to be some kind of resolution.
Yes, and I mean, I think we've heard Mr. Larijani, the Iranian NSA, National Security Advisor, talking over the last 24 hours about the fact that Iran has prepared for a long war. And that, I would have thought, would make planners and policymakers in Washington somewhat nervous, because if they have planned for a long war, then 4 to 5 weeks might be even too short a period of time to achieve the sort of objectives that were listed on Saturday morning.
Do you believe that's bluster, or do you think the regime has the capability to sustain this for as long as it goes on for?
Well, my guess is that they're probably talking about quite a lot of asymmetric capabilities. I doubt that many of their sponsors, whether that's Russia or China, is resupplying them at the moment. So I think it's extremely difficult for us to know what sort of capabilities they've got and for how long they can continue to use them. But I think, you know, we should have noticed how quickly they moved into succession arrangements when the Supreme Leader was killed the other day. Pretty quickly, that three-man committee was put in place, and one would guess that the council that's going to select his successor has probably already met or is meeting in privacy somewhere. So I think they're organised, and the fact that we've seen, you know, what has been quite a significant response by the regime, despite the way in which the regime's been attacked, that would imply that it's quite decentralised and therefore quite organised. So I think we should be, you know, cautious about writing that regime off in terms of its military capability at the moment. That would be my advice anyway.
Yeah, and of course, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was an incredibly powerful man, but we know that this regime isn't just about personalities. And as you say, they moved quite swiftly to create that three-man committee for this temporary council. Do you believe that regime change is possible, especially through an aerial campaign?
Well, I think history would suggest that it's most unlikely that an air campaign can achieve that sort of objective, and that you need some support on the ground, whether that's your own boots on the ground or whether it's a revolution. And I think what we need to recognise about the Islamic Republic is it's not a pyramid of power. You know, it's a maze of power. Every corridor looks like an exit until it loops back to the same centre. You know, the design isn't accidental. It's survival architecture. So this will be a very different proposition, I would have thought, to some of the propositions that the United States has taken on in the past, whether that's Venezuela recently or even, for that matter, Saddam Hussein. So I think, you know, one's taking on something here which is designed to survive. And it's in the interests, I'm afraid, of most people in the regime who keep it up, whether it's the IRGC or the Basij, the regime's brown shirts, not to allow the regime to fall because they're, frankly, going to be frightened of what might follow. And a regime like this rules by fear. And I think it's pretty noticeable that we have not seen the population rising up at the moment. Would they indeed believe that the words of a US president are reliable words, particularly when he also said yesterday to the Atlantic Journal that they want to talk, and I have agreed to talk, So I will be talking to them. Now, that wouldn't necessarily make you want to rise up as a revolutionary, I would have thought, at this particular point in time, because you might wonder whether or not there's still going to be the same regime in power, even if you did rise up. So I think there are a lot of unanswered questions here about how regime change can actually occur, whether it's a revolution or whether somebody's going to have to intervene physically on the ground.
So, Nick Carter, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, earlier we had a Pentagon briefing from the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Dan Kane, who gave us more information about America's combat operations. Let's just have a listen.
At 3:38 p.m. on Friday, February 27th, the United States Central Command, through the Secretary of War, received the final go order from President Trump. The president directed, and I quote, "Operation Epic Fury is approved. No aborts. Good luck," close quote. In the region, every element of the joint force made their final preparations. Air defense batteries readied themselves, checking their systems to respond to Iranian attacks. Pilots and crews rehearsed their strike packages for the final time. Air crews began loading their final weapons, and 2 carrier strike groups began to move towards their launching points. Across the globe, our operations centers came alive in Tampa, Florida, here at the Pentagon, and of course forward in the Central Command AOR. As always, operational security was paramount as we sought to maintain and sustain the element of surprise. This operation was highly classified so that at H hour, the enemy would see one thing: speed, surprise, and violence of action. The first movers were U.S. Cybercom and U.S. Spacecom, layering non-kinetic effects, disrupting and degrading and blinding Iran's ability to see, communicate, and respond. At H hour, the beginning of major combat operations, 01:15 local Eastern Daylight Time, 9:45 local AM Tehran time. As dawn crept up across the Central Command AOR, the skies surged to life. More than 100 aircraft launched from land, sea, fighters, tankers, airborne early warning, electronic attack, bombers from the States, and unmanned platforms, forming a single synchronized wave. This was a daylight strike based on a trigger event conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces, enabled by the U.S. intelligence community. The first shooters at sea were Tomahawks unleashed by the United States Navy, closed in on Iranian naval forces, and began to conduct strikes across the southern flank in Iran. On the ground, forces fired precision standoff weapons, measured, deliberate, precise, and lethal. This was a massive, overwhelming attack across all domains of warfare, striking more than 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours. We are now roughly 57 hours into the operation. In the initial phase, CENTCOM's focus was systematic targeting of Iranians' command and control infrastructure, naval forces, ballistic missile sites, and intelligence infrastructure designed to daze and confuse them. Coordinated space and cyber operations effectively disrupted communications and sensor networks across the area of responsibility, leaving the adversary without the ability to see, coordinate, or respond effectively. The combined impact of these strikes, swift, precise, and overwhelming, has resulted in the establishment of local air superiority. This air superiority will not only enhance the protection of our forces, but also allow them to continue the work over Iran.
General Dan Kane speaking there at that Pentagon briefing earlier. Well, I'm joined now by Robert Pape, Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago and an expert in international security affairs. Professor, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Just give us a sense of how you think the last few days has developed, because, of course, this is a conflict the United States and Israel have begun. It's unclear completely what the objectives here are or how it will end.
So I have studied every air campaign since World War I. This is my specialty. I spent 3 years teaching conventional targeting strategy for the U.S. Air Force. I've studied leadership decapitation in detail. I've modeled the bombing of Fordow, the regime change in Iran, for 20 years. So this is something I know quite a bit about. And literally 10 days ago, I started on Substack, The Escalation Trap, because I worried exactly watching the Armada being built, we would fall into the escalation trap, and that's what's happened. We are now in the grip of the escalation trap, or the smart bomb trap to be more precise, where the illusion of the 100% tactical success, which is real, it's the success of the bombs blowing up the targets is not false. It creates the illusion of control of escalation. And that is the smart bomb trap, and that is what has gripped us right now. And the problem is that once we drop those bombs and once we announce regime change is our goal, and we had no other tools, trying to do this from the air, this has never worked in over 100 years. This is not like it works sometimes or rarely works. I'm choosing my words carefully. President Trump is up against the weight of history here. And it's the illusion of the smart bombs being near perfect in destroying their target. And the problem is when those bombs fall, they change politics in the target. They inject nationalism into the regime. They inject nationalism into the society. And they essentially fuse the regime and society against the air power attacker. And this is what you are seeing, because now society and the regime are taking more risky steps. And they do things that no one anticipated before. And that failure to anticipate the worst case, that has happened numerous times with smart bombs. That's just what happened in the last 36 hours. Nobody in the Pentagon was expecting the wider war strategy by Iran, and that's what's happened.
So, Professor, given you've studied this so carefully and you say that this President Trump is going against the weight of history and no aerial campaign alone has worked, and certainly, when they've put troops on the ground, because there was no objective really in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've seen those wars fail as well. If you look at this moment then, how do you think this is all going to end?
I think this is, we have crossed the threshold. And the threshold we crossed, this is not the first time we went after Iran. This is now the second time. In June, we bombed Fordow. Again, tactically brilliant, but we did not get the enriched uranium. And because we didn't get the enriched uranium, there is worry that Iran will build a nuclear weapon. You heard President Trump talk about that. And that is what has brought us back again. And what do you have to do now? What can you do now? Only the first thing you think about is regime change. I've been modeling this for 20 years. This is what happens. Stage 1, you attack Fordow. Stage 2, a year later, you come back with regime change. And you're seeing that not work out very well because the regime is not collapsing. It is strengthening and doing things we didn't anticipate. A long war. So what do you got? You've got now the beginnings of a long war. President Trump is scrambling. He's trying to gain control of the situation again. He didn't even rule out ground forces today. That's stage 3 of the smart bomb trap. So I'm not saying we'll surely get to stage 3, but right now we are in the thick of a prolonged war.
Just to interrupt you there, so you are saying that President Trump's saying this is going to last 4 to 5 weeks, or he could stay longer. Do you think that his generals are advising him that, look, we're not seeing the kind of collapse of the IRGC or the regime leadership, even though we've taken out 48 of these leaders, including the supreme leader, this is going to be something we're going to have to commit to in the long run?
I'm saying it's worse than that. I'm saying he's losing control of the decision to escalate. The enemy now, with each passing day, has more and more control of the trajectory of what's happening. This is different than what happened last June. So President Trump is saying, well, I could do this, I could do that. But notice that if the Saudi government, if the Saudi leader, for example, was assassinated tomorrow, is President Trump just going to walk away and say, well, I said I wouldn't go more than a couple of weeks? No, he's stuck now in the smart bomb trap. He's on the horns of a dilemma. He can cut his losses now in the short term, but he probably can't even get the deal that was on the table last Friday at this point with the Iranians. So he can cut his losses now, pay a political price, try to stop the war here, even though it would be a failure. Or he can go play for the long run and become Lyndon Johnson in the Vietnam War and face a more disastrous political outcome in the fall. And so this is really the smart bomb trap. There is no way in which we control the escalation at this point.
Of this situation. Professor Robert Pape, fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Diana Magnay, who joins me live here now. And Diana, fascinating talking to that professor who's, even the generals that I've been speaking to are concerned that the objectives here aren't totally clear, nor is the end game.
Absolutely not. It seems to be we create the conditions and then the Iranian people can take it on from there and do it themselves, which is effectively an abrogation of responsibility. And they haven't defined what those conditions are. At what point do they say, we've done enough, now it's over to you? What will we see on the ground at that stage? What will have happened to the Revolutionary Guard, the Basij, their Basij volunteers, the military? These are hundreds of thousands of people that we are talking about in a country of 92 million. It's sort of unfathomable that in 4 or 5 weeks it'll all be over and the Iranian people can just take it on from there.
Yeah, and we're seeing the Revolutionary Guard certainly continuing their campaign. They seem like they, were prepared for this, and they are slowly rolling out their plans, whether it's hitting infrastructure or civilian sites.
Well, exactly. And I mean, as Trump himself today said, we did not expect, I think it was